I see the baby bird. Come here.
Huh?
It's in the tree.
Huh? He's trying to fly.
Yeah, he's not very good at it yet, is he?
For a few weeks every evening, my daughter and I would walk by a small grove of trees on the edge of a public garden and watch the young fledgling birds as they start to leave the nest.
What was it doing?
It's saying, Mama, come feed me some food.
Mama, come feed me some food.
It's amazing that along this busy road, just a block from the L, nature is still doing its thing. Eggs are laid, baby birds hatch, and young birds fledge. And all of this happens because of city trees.
Is it in the tree?
I see a bumblebee. I see a bumblebee, Mom. I saw a bumblebee.
Hi, and welcome to Gritty and Green. I'm your host, Meredith Nutting. On this episode, I'm joined by Jacelyn Blank from the Philly Tree People. We're going to be talking about street trees, why we need them, and how we can care for them. So let's get growing. Do you ever look around the city and wonder what was here before all this? Back before the Dutch and Swedes arrived and started settling in the area between the Delaware and the Schuylkill River, now known as Philadelphia, it was inhabited by the Lenni Lenape peoples. The land they lived on was made up of marshes and rolling hills of meadows and trees. Lots of old trees. And it was under one of these old trees that William Penn and Chief Tamanon signed the Treaty of Shackamaxon in 1682. You can find a descendant of that tree in Penn Treaty Park, though it's only about 15 years old. Philadelphia's founder, William Penn, envisioned a lush city filled with greenery in the state of Pennsylvania, which is Latin for Penn's Woods. He even gave Philadelphia a nickname, the Green Country Town. He planned the city so that the homes would be surrounded by gardens, and 5 lush green squares would break up the grid of streets. Streets with names like Pine, Spruce, Walnut, Chestnut, Cedar, Mulberry, and Sassafras. Those last 3 have been renamed to South Arch and Race Streets. But looking at our city filled with connected row homes and few trees, you have to wonder, what happened? Well, William Penn's vision wasn't as idealistic as it seems. It wasn't just about big green trees. That green space was practical. Separating homes could stop fires and plagues from spreading. And those green public squares drove up real estate prices, even if the green spaces weren't funded or cared for. And underfunded, those 5 squares eventually became dumps, literally. Along with filling them with trash, people also used them as cemeteries and sites for public hangings. Finally, in the 1820s, the city did take them over. They planted some nice trees, but they still barely funded them. Philadelphia also bought swaths of forested land up the Schuylkill River, creating Fairmount Park, including at the time the Wissahickon, in order to protect the city's water supply from encroaching industry, but still didn't fund it. Compared to the money that other cities put into their park systems, Philadelphia spends well below average. And that doesn't just affect the trees in the parks, it affects the street trees as well. Despite the promising start of a tree-filled city, modern Philadelphia is actually doing pretty abysmal when it comes to urban trees. You can tell if you look at a satellite view of the city for the amount of urban tree canopy. That's basically where the trees shade the ground. The amount of tree canopy affects the temperature, the air quality, the health of the people living there, even the crime rate. But out of the major East Coast cities, Philadelphia ranks almost last in the percentage of urban tree canopy. Where Boston has about 29% and New York has about 16%, Philadelphia only has 13%. Even the higher estimate of 20% is still really low. But there are people working really hard to change that, and I got to sit down with one of them.
My name is Jacelyn Blank. I am co-founder and co-operator of the not-for-profit Pennsylvania Horticultural Society tree tender group, Philly Tree People. I grew up in Chester County, so I was used to being around trees, nature. Our first summer in our place on Tulip Street was I think we gravitated towards renting that place because the block was full of street trees. It produced so much shade. I walked home from the L one afternoon and just significant temperature drop by 10 degrees or more, turning off of a block with no trees onto my block.
After living in Philadelphia for about a year, Jacelyn and her husband bought a house.
It was in the East Kensington Neighbors civic area, so I started attending the civic meetings. And that is where I met Nakia.
Nakia Perez-Kibler is a born and raised Philadelphian whose passion for nature led to a master's in environmental studies.
We hit it off, got to talking about environment and all those things, and she said, hey, I'm taking the PHS tree tender training. Would you have interest in that? And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Why not?
The Philadelphia Horticultural Society is probably best known for the flower show they put on every spring, but they actually have a lot of programs around the city geared to help improve the lives of all Philadelphians through plants. One of those initiatives is the Tree Tender program.
So the Tree Tender organization was actually started 30 years ago by Mindy Maslin, who started working for Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, and her job was to launch the Tree Tender program. And that was a way for more street trees to be planted in the city, throughout the city, using citizen scientists, just regular citizens who took the training, learning how to plant trees.
Over 6,500 people have been trained in how to plant and care for street trees. The goal is that these tree tenders will form groups in their own area to help neighbors plant and care for trees of their own.
That's where we ended up meeting our ultimate third partner, Dina.
Entomologist Dina Richmond also lived in the Kensington area.
Right off the bat, pretty much, as soon as we were done with that coursework, did we organize and become Philly Tree People. And we just put out an ad in the local newspaper, the Star and the Spirit, saying, hey, free street trees. And people started applying, and we probably planted about 50 trees or so that first planting, and we just have done it ever since. Everything is volunteer. We do 2 street tree plantings a year, and then we started with pruning clubs and then other little events. We are such a well-oiled machine at this point and have had so many people that have volunteered with us for over a decade, and now more certified arborists who have been coming to our plantings, who are leading our groups.
It may seem like planting trees is pretty straightforward. You dig a hole and you put it in the ground. But there's a reason that the Tree Tender certification is 9 hours of instruction, and becoming an ISA certified arborist requires 1,500 hours of experience.
There's a lot to know. That, my whole life didn't know a thing about them. They were just there, right? And then I took the Tree Tender training and walked around my neighborhood with a very different lens on how I viewed trees, specifically in an urban environment.
Trees evolved over millions of years to have lots of space. Their branches extend into the sky covered in leaves that convert carbon dioxide into oxygen in a process powered by the sun. Their roots extend out across the surface of the nutrient-rich soil nearly as far as their branches, where they absorb the water and the oxygen they need.
Philadelphia was a wooded area at one point, and then slowly just became an urban area, and people didn't understand the science behind why trees were important.
Without planning our cities with consideration for these massive plants, we force our urban trees to live crammed into spaces dictated by us. Their branches can't get in the way of cars or pedestrians or power lines. Their roots get a measly 3 feet of open soil carved out of the sidewalk. We really haven't set up our trees to succeed.
We have a laundry list of stipulations, right? It needs to be so many, like 30 feet from a fire hydrant, from the corner of a property for safety issues. It needs to be like, I think 15 feet from a stop sign, driveways, utilities, yada yada. There's so many regulations, and it's all basically for traffic safety.
Even if you can figure out where trees can go while still giving the right of way to cars, there are still lots of challenges.
We've been battling for years now with the increase in development in our neighborhood, with the developers to be more mindful about where they're putting their infrastructure, so gas and water lines, and it seems like they're putting it all in the spaces that were the viable spots to put a tree. Now we can't put one at all. For Philly in particular, it's an old infrastructure. There are times where we'll have a pit cut in the sidewalk, and our volunteers will go out to plant the tree, and then they'll find that there's another sidewalk underneath all of the soil. Yeah, it's just like everything is layered here. We just keep putting it on top, right?
So much of what happens in a tree happens underground. The roots obviously provide stability, but they also are responsible for absorbing the water and nutrients vital for the tree to grow. The roots actually hold 50 to 70% of the energy the plant creates, and researchers have just started learning about how trees connect together through a network of roots and fungal mycelium. It's amazing to think about how many roots from different trees might be under your feet as you are walking past a tree pit.
So yeah, you can imagine the majority of the root system is growing beyond that, but it's encapsulated by concrete or, the street. And then it hits a wall against the foundation of the house. The pit size is just not big enough. We've been advocating for them to be cut even bigger. We've been able to get more funding to widen people's pits or to just have a larger pit in general.
But finding space for the roots isn't the only challenge the tree tenders face.
Making sure that we have the right species in the right location. There are a lot of aging trees throughout the entire city and sidewalks, and they were just the inappropriate species for that space. They planted them young, under wires. Lo and behold, it's a sycamore or it's a ginkgo. And then Pico comes by because people want their electricity and they just hack the tree. And then that causes more problems down the road because you're opening up wounds for disease and decay.
Of course, trees also have years and years of bad PR to combat.
Other issues are just people not wanting them, hating trees, not wanting birds pooping on their cars, not wanting to clean up leaves. I don't know, having a strong distaste for nature.
Trees have been painted as a big nuisance with little to no benefits for decades. A lot of this distaste comes from misinformation. One big misperception is that trees will harm your home and cost you a fortune.
I always think about Little Shop of Horrors. Like the plant is not attacking your pipes. However, the root system could get into your pipes if there was already a breach in your pipe, if it's broken.
Usually homeowners only know about old pipes until after they crack and the tree roots have found their way in. At first glance, it may look like the tree caused the issue instead of just taking advantage of it. Unfortunately, this misblame is a common theme in a lot of human versus nature conflicts, and it all comes down to lack of education.
The roots system of a tree, they only grow 12 to 24 inches in depth. They mostly grow out lengthwise. People always assume that they're growing down deep. So I say, your gas line, your water line, those are 6 feet underground. Trees' roots are not going to get there unless, of course, there is a breach. There's something going on underneath the sidewalk. The bigger the tree, the deeper the roots will go, but not that far because they need oxygen. They need to be able to, get the oxygen that's coming down through the soil into the root system.
So these misperceptions do stop people from getting trees, but caring for a street tree is also just a lot of work.
I think the biggest thing that people don't understand is that it's a commitment. You need to water that tree 20 gallons to 30 gallons a week for up to 2 years, except for when the ground's frozen. You need to prune it when things are damaged. We'd rather it get done appropriately with the right tools and mindfully than trucks for people.
Somehow, in spite of all of this, trees are being planted every year.
We're planting over 1,000 trees collectively as a tree tender organization throughout the whole city, every planting twice a year. And at this point, we're well over having planted 2,000 plus trees all throughout Kensington.
Philly Tree People provides trees to both the Fishtown and Kensington neighborhood, where the tree canopy coverage is between 3 and 8%. Both areas are going through gentrification, though it's moving a bit faster in Fishtown. Even if you don't live in Philadelphia, you may have heard of Kensington because it's home to one of the country's biggest open-air drug markets, and it's brought up a lot in the national news coverage about the opioid crisis. Kensington also has a poverty rate that hovers around 50%. That's nearly double the city average. Rates of people unemployed, underinsured, and living with chronic diseases are all also above the city average. Philadelphia struggles with implementing large-scope programs that will actually help the community, and while it might seem trivial, trees could be a part of the solution.
Throughout our city, in specific neighborhoods like Kensington, North Kensington, they don't have the shade. And because of that, the heat island effect that's caused from all of that heat retention also is cause for a lot of premature deaths, typically in line with a lower socioeconomic class of people that don't have the funding or the resources to have proper air conditioning. So they're hotter, and that leads to early death.
Urban trees are also linked to cleaner air and lower asthma rates. Did you know that in Philadelphia, kids with asthma miss an average of 3 weeks of school? Those are days they may be in the hospital and that their parents may miss work. So it's not just our physical health that's improved by trees, but the health of our society.
Street-lined trees are more welcoming for people, and neighbors tend to sit outside more. And so they get to know each other more. So there's actually been a link in a decrease in domestic violence and other violent acts that happen throughout the city. Like a greener place is inherently cleaner because there's people involved and invested and out taking care of the environment because it makes you happier.
So against all these challenges and with a sense of urgency, the tree tenders around the city have been working really hard to try to get more trees in the ground. And then they got some pretty heartbreaking news.
PHS and Parks and Recreation work with the Department of Forestry. They wanted to do a study. Like, okay, Tree Tenders organization has been operating for a while. They've been planting trees at a faster rate than Parks and Rec was able to do. We want to know if what they're doing is really impactful. Is it doing what it expected to do? So they did this 10-year study from 2008 to 2018 using LIDAR to detect tree canopy throughout all of the city. And after that 10-year study, tracking all of these trees and their growth, we found that we lost canopy cover. We lost 6 football fields worth of canopy cover in that time. So we were a little bit devastated. But they were able to tell us why. Well, development. We had a huge boom in development at that time. They weren't necessarily detecting what species tree. So there were a lot of trees that were invasive species that are not from this area. So the removal of that, the fact that we had an aging canopy that was just naturally dying. And although we had put in thousands of trees, some of them just weren't big enough to be detected by LiDAR. But we also just recognized where the heat islands were, what neighborhoods throughout the city did not. I mean, you can see it on the ground, but when you see it from above, it's stark, the difference between where there's green coverage and where there is not. So out of that study, we had the tree summit. So all the minds, the tree tenders, the arborists, the environmentalists, the professors in all those different fields came together, politicians. What do we need to do? And from there, that they were like, oh, well, we need a plan. So yeah, we created the Philly Tree Plan.
The Philly Tree Plan's main aim is to increase the tree canopy equitably throughout every neighborhood with the goal of hitting 30% urban tree canopy coverage in the next decade.
And then the next step was lobbying to have politicians actually take it seriously and start writing legislation. And it's slow and painful. And we've lost a lot of trees in that time.
It can take years for a sapling to replace a mature canopy tree, so if we're going to reach that goal of increasing our canopy coverage by 27%, we need to start planting a lot more trees now.
You can get a street tree through a tree tender organization. You can get a street tree through Parks and Recreations, or you can hire your own private company to do the work for you. Both the tree tender organization and Parks and Rec are free. However, Parks and Recreations does not have the funding to fulfill all of the needs that there are as far as planting new trees, taking old trees down, doing pruning work.
Remember when we were talking earlier about the lack of funding Philly puts towards trees and green spaces in general?
The PHS Tree Tenders organization has really fostered a brilliant relationship with Parks and Recreations over the years to vet those applications and the processes a lot more so that we're finally at a point where like a lot of things are much more streamlined now.
Not only do we need to plant more trees, but we need to take care of the ones that we already have. And for that, Jacelyn has a few tips.
Do not add more soil. When we plant our trees, that's the way it should look and always look.
Trees naturally widen at the bottom. This is called the root flare, and adding soil above that can cause a lot of problems.
If you put too much mulch on, then the trunk of the tree thinks that it needs to reroot because you've covered its root flare. It's not getting the oxygen it needs, so that makes it unstable. Make sure there's absolutely no weeds in your pit. Weeds have more tenacious root systems and will take the necessary water for the tree. Definitely no weed whacking. Perennial plants, I've seen a lot of people do perennials. That is also in competition for the much needed water that the tree's roots are hardly getting. If you want to put flowers in there, we usually say put in annuals. The root systems don't get so large that they're not taking away the water resource that's coming from rainfall. And then that way, when you notice that they need water, oh, I should water my tree. We don't really suggest adding fertilizers. Fertilizers are like a prescription drug. In a tree pit, you're adding it to this little section of space, and then the roots start growing beyond that space, and then they're not getting those nutrients or that prescription drug. The roots will curl back because it wants that. It's a drug. And then that causes the instability of the root structure. The other thing that people don't really consider too is that over time, from animals walking across and people walking across that pit, you're compacting the soil, which is not allowing airflow, and it's not allowing for the rainwater or even when you're watering the tree, it doesn't allow for it to seep into the soil. So I'm constantly the advocate of going out there and doing soil aeration.
Jacelyn also suggests adding barriers to keep dogs and people out of the tree pits. The best barrier is higher on the sidewalk side and tapers down to the street, allowing soil and excess water to run out. But even if you don't have a tree of your own, there are so many opportunities throughout the city to care for trees in our urban forest.
We will at times plant up to 100 trees in one morning. So we need at least 100 volunteers, and we usually get it. We've had people that have been coming and volunteering with us for years, and they just love coming out and planting. It's fun. It's a good way to meet people, meet your neighbors too. Pruning clubs, not as exciting. I've tried encouraging people, like going to our Neighbors Association meetings and saying, do you have pent-up rage? Come use saws and shears and cut your anger out. And they're like, oh. They're just like, it's not quite as fun. But when I do get people out and they do the work, they're like, wow, Jacelyn, this was fun. This is good. I like this. It's totally satisfying.
And if you're not a hands-on kind of person, but you still would love to support getting more trees into the ground, money always helps.
We are truly a not-for-profit in all shapes and forms of none of us gets paid. What money comes in goes out to mostly help fund feeding our volunteers at our planting events. That's been a big draw for people, and I think that's what has helped other groups figure out how to hold on to volunteers. Putting a tree in the ground, you need to have food. And then we want to be able to provide them with tools. So that's like a huge thing. We have to upkeep our tool library.
Working to plant more trees despite all of the challenges and the slow progress, I asked Jacelyn if she saw evidence that things were moving forward.
I see it all over the place. I see trees that we planted 17 years ago, and I'm like, oh my God, that was like a twig. But what's also weird is some of these street trees, they can live a lot longer, but their life is certainly shorter in an urban environment than it would be in the forest because of all those crazy variables. We need to advocate for more intentional, large green spaces. We need to advocate for our homes to have more outdoor space. We just need more widespread education on it, like everything. But that's my job, to be preaching to anybody who will listen to me.
That was Jacelyn Blank with the Philadelphia Horticultural Society's tree tender group, Philly Tree People. To find out more about Philly Tree People or to find a tree tenders group near you, check out the links in the show notes. And if you can, consider getting your own tree or volunteer to help care for some street trees in your neighborhood. Okay, let's answer some questions from you. Nate Vogel in South Philly writes, one question that I'm really curious about is managing a microclimate in a South Philly back patio. These patios, as you probably know, are basically cement wells surrounded by houses and other cement wells. They get so hot. And they have weird patterns with sunlight because of all the walls around. My plants so often end up cooking later in the summer. If you have any ideas for resources that I could learn from, I would really appreciate it. Or maybe dealing with urban microclimates might be an interesting podcast episode. I love this question. For gardeners, microclimates can be a frustrating force that causes some plants to mysteriously thrive and others to completely fail. A microclimate is the climate in an area that's just different from its surroundings. So the heat island effect that we've talked about in this episode and in episode 1 with Helena Von Fleet from BioPhilly is an example of a microclimate. The temperature in the city is higher than the surrounding area. But also within the city or even your garden, there can be smaller microclimates. These can include changes in temperature, wind speed and direction, humidity, and anything else. In cities, things like dryer vents can make sections of your garden hotter and more humid than other sections. Or in Nate's case, cinder block walls reflecting and trapping heat in a concrete patio. So, solutions. You could have your plants in containers that could be easily moved as the sun travels across your patio. But honestly, that can be a lot of work. One thing you may want to consider is an awning or a shade of some sort. This can help cut down on the direct and reflected sun. And if it's easily retractable, you can put it up just during the hottest times. You could go even extra green and create a shade using trellised plants. I've actually seen this in a South Philly backyard. It was kind of a pergola with a squash growing up it and then across the top. The squash loved the sun and shaded the patio below. Even if you don't want to grow plants over your head, growing heat-loving plants up the wall could cut down on reflected light. Sun-loving plants like succulents and Mediterranean herbs would do well in vertical planters that would absorb the heat rather than bounce it below onto your patio. Even painting the walls a darker color so they're absorbing, not reflecting the light might help. Finally, set yourself up for success and go with plants that love sun and heat. It sounds like you've been really observing your garden, which is really one of the best things a gardener can do to improve their planting. Let me know if you try any of these things and how it goes. And you're right, this is a really great topic to explore more deeply in another episode. Thanks for the idea. If you have garden-related questions, please send them to me at grittyandgreen@coolgoonproductions.com. Thanks so much for listening. I can't wait to share next week's episode of Gritty and Green with you. If you're enjoying this podcast, I'd love it if you'd like, subscribe, rate, all of those things so that others can find it. Gritty and Green is presented by Green Philly in collaboration with Cool Goon Productions. It was written, directed, and edited by me, Meredith Nutting. Theme music by Kazuya. If you would like more information about local sustainability, go to greenphl.com.